weather change, and they're out in the desert in front of a fire. They can see the horizon, the vistas, and all of this. And Elihu's making his great speech as he thinks he's doing, and all of a sudden the weather pattern changes and he's distracted. And he ends in verse 23. Actually, go up to verse 20. His declaration is, should God be told by someone like me, I wish to speak to you? I wish you would speak. If a man were to speak, surely he would be swallowed up by the Lord. So Elihu is making this dismissal of Job's plea that God would actually speak to him and explain what's going on. So the summation for Job, we go back to chapter 13 and we can see the entirety of Job's complaint is in a couple of verses. He's lost his family, he's lost his wealth, he's lost his health. He's got a potter's chunk of clay and he's scraping the boils from head to toe at a fire and he's covered in ashes. Something to deal with the pain. Chapter 13, he sums it up. Verse 3. But I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. What's going on? Chapter 13, verse 3. But I would speak to him. If I could, I would speak to him, because I desire to know what's going on. He's in huge pain, tremendous confusion. And then, same chapter 13, go over to verse 22. And now he's pleading with God. That was his comment to his friends. This is his plea to God. He says to God, call on me, and I'll answer you. Or let me speak, and then you can respond to me. Something. But the silence is crushing me. I wish I were dead. The silence is what's crushing me. I can't pinpoint something that I've done to deserve it, which is where we tend to go. And I can't work out in my mind what you're doing that it's come upon me. But the silence is crushing me, and it's almost like you've made me your enemy. So this is where Job is at. And it says in chapter 31, thus the words of Job are ended. The back and forth with his buddies, the back and forth 3-round debate, and Job says, that's it, I'm not saying another word, that's it. And then he sits down. Elihu speaks in his arrogance, and as Elihu speaks in those next 5 chapters, his speech is distracted by the storm that's on the horizon. And he even mentions a whirlwind. And he mentions the lightning and the thundering. Now go to chapter 38. And he mocks the concept of God actually speaking to you, Job. And they all do. Like, Job, you're a madman. You're continuing with God. You think God will speak to you? He'll consume you. Verse 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, and he said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? 5 guys sitting around the fire, 3 of them are called Job's comforters. Job said, you were my friends, but you abhor me and you're like crushing me. And God is speaking to all 5 of them at this point, saying, you guys all are speaking without knowledge. You're confusing the counsel that's happening here. So let's let God speak. Verse 3, now to Job, he says, prepare yourself like a man. I will question you and you will answer me. So you asked for it. Now you got it. You sure you wanted that? And this is where God's going to do a rapid fire. 58 questions in the next 2 chapters that will confound anybody to answer them. So what God will do is He'll begin with creation. He'll speak to astronomy. He'll speak to the hydrologic system, the rain cycle. He'll speak to nature. He'll speak to the light spectrum. All these things we know in our science world, but on a very limited layer. But God's speaking to Job, were you there? Do you know? And what it's doing is it's actually helping Job go from, if I only knew, like Job's like this big in his own mind, to he's the ant looking at the eagle and has no idea. The ant, compared to the eagle soaring, what's the ant, right? And in some respect, that's what we have. Job is going to be minimized in his own sight. And God will help him do that. And God needs to help us do that so that we don't think of ourselves more highly than we ought to. Now, his friend said, Job, who are you to say such things? And we talked about that. On the one hand, they're right. Who am I? But yet God says, come to me, ask me, draw near. So Job was kind of right, they were kind of right, but sometimes when we come in pride, we need to be the ant. But when we come in humility, God says, you're welcome to come on in. There's a real echo, Louis. I don't know what's going on there. I feel like it's like rattling my brain. Okay. Now I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you must know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened, or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Well, this is a good question. Good series of questions, and it actually gives us some insight into the creation account that we don't have anywhere else. But contemplate right now, where were you, Job, when I laid the foundation of the earth? He's the creator God. When God wants to set us correct, it's always good to go back to, yeah, but He made everything. Who am I? I'm clay. I'm clay in His hands. He's the potter, and I'm the clay. And this is where He's kind of captivating Job's mind right at the outset. It's like, boom, okay, slow down, Job. I know you want to speak to me. I know you've got a lot of questions, but slow down because I'm the potter. You're the clay. And what's the clay to say to the potter? Why have you made me thus? Right, we see that in a couple of other passages in Jeremiah. But look at verse 7. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. C.S. Lewis in his Chronicles of Narnia series, the one where it talks about Aslan making the world, he has the same idea of singing. Creation happens through singing and the process of song. And in this, we actually see that the angels are pre-existent prior to the world's coming into being. The angels, the sons of God, the morning stars, they're singing as God is creating. Isn't that interesting? They're already there because they're not part of time, space, matter, the box that we live in, this three-dimensional box. The angels are spiritual. They're outside of it too. But they actually have access to the box as well. So, just an interesting nugget there. Or who shut in the sea with the doors when it burst forth and issued from the womb? So this was speaking of the flood, worldwide flood that changed the geography, topography of the world. When it made the heaven, and when it made the clouds its garment, and thick clouds its swaddling band, when I fixed my limit for it, and set bars and doors, when I said, thus far you may come, no further, and here your proud waves must stop. So why is there a limit? Why is there a limit to the sea and the rain and the water? It's a gravitational force, right? We have gravity. So God's speaking to an invisible force that we can point to, but we can't prove or establish as something tangible. But it's there. It's a truth scientifically. And this is kind of what God is speaking at. You don't understand why the waves stop at the shore. Why don't they keep coming? You don't understand, Job. I did that. That's what God says. Have you commanded the morning since your days began? What makes day day and night night and morning morning? How does it keep going? How does it not stop? It's regular. Do you cause the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? God says, how do you explain one day after another, day on day on day on end? It's like, that's me. You take it for granted, Job. Days go by and you forget that it's another day dawning. That's me. I do that. And God's preparing him to see God differently than Job crying out at an ash heap saying, God, do you see my situation? Of course he does. He sees it. He sees your situation. He doesn't minimize it. He doesn't trivialize it, but he does see it. And the challenge for us is to allow God to be God without micromanage him as my God. But if you're my God, then why aren't you dealing with me very... Now, he wants to be intimate with us and walk us through it, but it doesn't necessarily mean he has to answer the why of it. Now, Job was getting very close to I'm going to raise my fist and demand why. You've made yourself an enemy to me. Why? God's like, I'm not your enemy. I'm accomplishing things. I have something in mind. So we know in James chapter 5, verse 11, the only time Job is referenced in the New Testament, there is an intended end to the story of Job's patience. That intended end is to reveal the compassion and mercy of God. It isn't to simply answer the why for Job. So I hope you guys have gotten that. We've repeated it a lot, and I think it's really valuable to understand that. And I just think it gives me helpful context for the entire book. Because all of the why questions, God isn't about the why. He's about revealing himself in a rich way to Job at the end, which is what he does. So let's get there. I'm going to belabor it. Verse 16, we'll skip a few here and there. Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? Has anyone been to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, the Marianas Trench? It's too far down. Can't get there. We can't see what's down there. Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Now, this is an interesting one. Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? So now we go to what we might call a metaphysical or eternal question beyond death. So these guys are all talking about what happens to the wicked at their death. Or Job is saying, I desire that I had never been born, or that I would die right now, so that I could be at peace in death. And God's like, Job, you don't even know. You don't know what's after death. Now, Jesus has told us in the New Testament. But Job didn't know. And he's just kind of spouting off his own ideas. And in that sense, God's rebuking him in a subtle way, like, Job, you're speaking like what you don't understand. Don't do that. Be aware, be cautious. Have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? We do now. They didn't then. We know the circumference of the earth, the depth of it, and all of that. But verse 19, where's the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where does darkness go? We can turn the lights off and we have darkness, but where did it go when we turn the lights on? This is the light spectrum. But we have, fractional understanding of the light spectrum, and God is pointing this out to them. At this point, it's just a reality that they can't really comprehend what it is. He goes into the hydrologic cycle, the treasury of snow, hail, for the day of battle. That whole chapter then is just a sequence of questions. Go to verse 31. Can you bind the cluster of Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth, which is a term for the zodiac? Can you bring out the zodiac in its season? Can you guide the great bear, a comet, with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of heaven? Can you set their dominion over the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds that an abundance of water may cover you? Can you send out lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Think about that. God's creating a personality with lightning, that lightning responds to him. Like he speaks to lightning and it goes out and responds back to him. Now Jesus is on the boat. Remember the disciples are all panicked and Jesus says, peace be still. And everything stopped. And it went calm. This is the idea. Job was already understanding from God's speaking to him That weather patterns aren't just weather patterns, they respond to God. And that's kind of interesting. He controls them, He made them, but there's a personality even in that, is how He's kind of trying to describe it. In verse 36, this kind of goes right to the heart of where Job is at. Who has put wisdom in the mind, or who has given understanding to the heart? I can give you understanding, Job. I can give you wisdom in the situation, but you're only demanding answers. Answers aren't always understanding or wisdom. Sometimes answers don't help. But I want to give you wisdom in how to walk through it. Right? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Who can pour out bottles of heaven when the dust hardens in the clumps and the clouds cling together? Now, verse 39, he shifts from weather, that kind of stuff, the light, hydrology and all that. He shifts to nature itself. Can you hunt the prey for the lion, Job? Or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? So what God is implying when He asks these questions is, can you do this, Job? Because this is what I do. And God's preparing us to understand that He actually cares for nature and the animal kingdom in a way that you don't even comprehend, Job. So let's listen and watch what God does. He kind of draws us in. When the young lions crouch in their dens or lurk in their lairs and lie in wait, who provides food for the raven? When its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food. Did you ever think a raven chirping is actually crying out to God? That's what God says. Now, Jesus said that God takes care of the birds of the field. He provides for them. How much more will He provide for you? How much more does He care for you? And this is what God's getting at to Job. But Jesus takes some of these same themes and He brings it closer. He brings it closer to us with the disciples later. But Job, do you know the time? So understand the chapter breaks aren't there. God has two speeches. So God has one speech where He kind of just peppers him with all these questions, and then He gives Job an opportunity to answer. And then God makes a declaration, and then He gives us an example of two amazing creatures that He has made in a contrast to where Job is sitting. So that's sort of the nutshell of God's portion, but the chapter breaks are just there for convenience. They're not actually in it, okay, in the original. So this is continuous thought. Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear their young, Job? I do. That's what God's saying. I do. Can you mark when the deer gives birth? I do. I'm aware of it. I take care of them. I help them. Can you number the months that they fulfill? Do you know the time when they bear young? When they bow down, bring forth their young, deliver their offspring, and their young are healthy? They grow strong with the grain, and they depart, and they don't return? Do you know about that? That life cycle of the deer, the goat? I do. I watch it. I take care of it. And this is interesting. Who set the wild donkey free? Who loosed the bonds of the onager, whose home I've made in the wilderness like a little badger or something? Verse 9, go down to verse 9. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you, Job? Are you able to domesticate a wild ox, a wild beast? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow and the ropes? So this is what he does. He starts walking this out, but he does a contrast, and it's really interesting in verse 13. The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but her wings and her pinions are like a kindly stork. Ostrich can't really fly. It's kind of hindered. It's earthbound. And she leaves her eggs on the ground and warms them in the dust. And she forgets that a foot might crush them or that a wild beast might break them. She treats her young harshly as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without any care or concern. Now look at this. Because God deprived her of wisdom, Job. God didn't endow her with understanding. So you're making an assumption about God, Job, that everything is just so. But observe the ostrich. The ostrich doesn't have any wisdom. It doesn't have any wit. It's a fool. But you're making an assumption that everything can be categorized in this clean line. And God says the ostrich is a counter-argument to that kind of mindset. And God won't be put in a box in clean lines and order. Because God does things that disrupt that idea. So when your order is disrupted, it's okay. Because God still knows and He still sees and He's okay with it. Are you okay with it? Because it might blow up your whole view of what God is doing. And sometimes when you demand to know what God's doing, it's going to get disrupted. And this is what the ostrich kind of helps us see. Well, doesn't the ostrich have instincts? Now it's interesting as we go forward. He contrasts the ostrich to a horse ready for battle. He's like, now, the ostrich on the one hand, but man, the horse on the other is ready for battle and has no fear. And actually snorts at the smell of the battle and is ready to jump in. And is prepared for it. And it's beautiful. It's like, have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. He paws in the valley, and he rejoices in his strength. He gallops into the clash of arms. The horse mocks at fear, and he's not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the spear and the javelin, and he devours the distance with fierceness and rage. Nor does he come to a halt because the trumpet has sounded. At the blast of the trumpet, he says, "Aha! It's time for war." He's ready to go. The horse understands and he knows. The ostrich doesn't understand even they're young. But the horse understands his purpose. And he's ready. Have you ever seen a working cow dog? Border Collie? Blue Heelers? My father-in-law had working cow dogs, and they're the most incredible animals. You can't have a Border Collie as a house pet. It doesn't work. They need something to do. They'll just destroy things. But if you put a Border Collie out in the field and you tell him to go get the herd and bring him, he'll run all the way to the back of him. He'll bring him all the way right to you because he knows what he's made to do. And God is saying, I give him wisdom to know what he ought to do. I'm involved in his life, even an animal like that. That's what God's saying about the horse, the ostrich. God takes interest in the goat on the mountain giving birth. So what is he doing? What's he helping Job see? Exactly what Jesus said. Don't you know my Father takes care of the lilies of the field, the birds of the air? How much more does he care for you? What are you worrying about? Why are you worried about this? And that's where God is going with Job. He's like, Job, nature's all around you. Nothing happens in nature without my input and it isn't instinct. Science tells us it's instinct. God is saying in these 2 chapters, it's me. God says, it's actually me. And can you imagine God interacting with every bird and every horse and every animal? Now, I was telling Lori yesterday when I was studying this, in Numbers we see Balaam wants to truck down and put a curse on the Israelites in Numbers. Let's go to that. It'd be fun to go to it. Numbers 23. Numbers 24 actually is where we need to go. Oh, no. One too far. Numbers 22. So Balaam is en route. He's been asked by this king to curse the nation of Israel as they're walking through his land. And he jumps on his donkey and he's running. He's pushing the donkey. He's going and going and going. And there's an angel that stands in the road. And the donkey runs around it. Second time, angel stands in the road. And the donkey scrapes his leg against the hill. And then the third time, the angel stands in the road. And the donkey sets. And Balaam jumps off the donkey. He starts whipping him like crazy because he's going to, if he pronounces the curse on the Israelites, he's going to get a big bag of money. So Balaam's like, he's ready to go. He's running greedily after the heir of Balaam. Is what we're told later. But Balaam jumps off and he's like smacking the donkey in verse 28. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've struck me these 3 times?" Now, if that isn't crazy enough, Balaam stops and he answers the donkey. And he's arguing with the donkey. "Well, because you've abused me. You ran my leg into the wall. And I wish there were a sword in my hand because I'd kill you right now, you dumb donkey." Now listen to this. The donkey answers him. So the donkey remembers, am I not your donkey in which you've ridden ever since I became yours? The donkey knows. The donkey has a memory. And not only that, was I ever disposed to do this to you? So think about in the first phrase, the donkey knows math because he said, "Why are you striking me 3 times?" You think about a donkey that knows math, and a donkey that remembers history, and a donkey that has a memory of his own life, and can actually articulate it to Job, or to Balaam in this situation. And I think it's an interesting insight because God opened the donkey's mouth, and the donkey could engage with him. So this is where you see C.S. Lewis has talking animals in Narnia. And that's his inspiration for it. Because the combination of the two is God can speak, and He does interact and speak with the animal kingdom in a way that's rich. But the encouragement is we're not the animal kingdom. How much more, Jesus said, how much more you? So when hard things happen, don't feel like it's abandonment. It's intimacy. And God wants it to be intimacy. And how much more you in that circumstance? I just think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing just seeing that. Does the hawk fly by your wisdom? Verse 26 of chapter 39, back to Job. Does the hawk fly by your wisdom, Job? Because the hawk actually flies by my wisdom. I inspire the hawk how to fly. Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest up on the high ridge and on the high mountain? He responds to what I tell him to do. I give him that idea. You see what he's saying? God's saying, we think about instinct. Our natural, scientific, show me kind of Western culture thinks instinct. God's dismissing instinct and saying, I tell them each and every one what to do and how and when to do it. I give them wisdom. And what he's doing is he's magnifying nature and helping Job understand, but my care is for you even more. Do you think I see? Do you think I don't see? I see it, Job. I'm aware. I'm aware of the simplest thing in the animal kingdom, and I'm also aware of you. So take heart, be encouraged. Chapter 40, verse 1. Moreover, the Lord answered Job, and He said, shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it. So this is his direct challenge to Job now. Okay, so Job, are you going to correct me now? You want to challenge me? Are you going to now correct me? Here's your chance. So now God gives Job an opportunity to respond. Because Job's been pleading, if you'd only speak to me, then I would answer. God says, all right, I spoke. Probably blew his mind that he's even speaking to him. The rest of the guys are like, you don't hear a word from them. At least now they know to be quiet and not pipe up. But Job's response now is, behold, I am vile. What can I answer you? What should I even say? I'm going to cover my mouth. And once I've spoken all of the babbling before this, I'm not going to answer even twice. I will not say another word. Now, Job is wise. It's all he could do to get it out and realize, I have totally blown it. I don't know what I was thinking. I shouldn't have ever said anything, probably. I'm not going to say anything else. So, amen to that, Job. And for us, we need to take the lesson. If God were to actually speak to you in your demand for why, you would be in the very same spot as Job. if you were ready to hear and humble, you would respond the same as Job was like, "What? I shouldn't have said anything. I'm going to back off now." So then God does a second round. Now he takes a second speech at Job. And this is where he's going to kind of draw out some insight. And I think this is the key passage right here. So God answered Job out of the whirlwind, and he said, verse 7, chapter 40, verse 7. Same thing he said back in the beginning of chapter 8, or 38. Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. We're going to do this twice, Job, round 2. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Do you have the wisdom to counteract what I've said and what I've declared? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? Now, this is what his friends were saying. Job, you're condemning God to justify yourself rather than justifying God. So his friends were accurate in assessing where Job was at. And this is actually repeated by God as a charge to Job. Job, you're really close. You've actually done it where you're condemning me to justify yourself. Now go back to chapter 1. All the way back in chapter 1, Satan proposed that if you take everything from him, he'll curse you to your face. He said it twice. Take his wealth, take his health, he'll curse you to your face, guaranteed. Job never got there. His wife said, just curse God and die. It's too hard. How long are you going to hold on to your integrity? But God says, Job, you've come really close to condemning me to justify yourself. He didn't curse him, but he's not justifying God. And there's a fine line of be careful. Don't justify yourself and somehow condemn God. So verse 9, back to chapter 40, verse 9. Have you an arm like God? Is your power like God? Now there's a passage in Isaiah that talks about, is the arm of the Lord short that he cannot save? No. His arm is able to save. This is what he's speaking about. Because he talks to Job about being able to save yourself at the end of this section. The arm of the Lord is able to save, but your sins have separated you from him. So here we go. Or can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and splendor. Array yourself with glory and beauty. So God's going to give Job a checklist of things that God will say, okay, you're off the hook for condemning me if you can match these criteria. Then you'll be in good shape. So I'm going to give you a checklist, Job, and then we'll be set. So if you can accomplish these things, then I'll yield to you. So God's entering into it, not ready to just like zap fry him with lightning and strike him dead, but he's entering into like, okay, Job, let's hear it out. Here's the criteria, though. So this is the impossible ask, right? The impossible requirement for Job, and he's going to see it. But imagine who is able to do these things. And this is the key. Who is able to thunder with a voice like his? Who is able to adorn himself with majesty and splendor? To array himself with glory and beauty? Can you, Job, disperse the rage of your wrath? Look on everyone who is proud and humble him? Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust forever or together. Bind their faces in hidden darkness. If you can do these things, Job, this checklist, then I also will confess to you that you are able. You can save yourself. So there are two possibilities in the Bible of being saved. There are two ways. Did you know that? One is through faith in Christ, and the other is being Christ himself. Right? I mean, that's essentially what he's showing us. And I know what? I'm not Christ. So I've got one option left. through faith in the one who can do these things, I'm in good shape because I'm able to be brought into his family. So that's what he's describing. We're actually seeing a glimpse of the Mount of Transfiguration with the glory. We're seeing a glimpse of the return of Christ in verse 11, Revelation 19. He's bringing everyone low. He's actually crushing them underfoot. It's the treading of the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. Everyone who's proud is going to be brought low, and they're going to be cast into outer darkness. Philippians 2, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord of all. So we have this encapsulated description of a few key points of the ministry of Christ as the Messiah. Dynamic. So that's God's final kind of declaration, but now he's going to do a contrast with two of his great creations. We have the behemoth on the one hand, the Leviathan on the other. If you guys didn't realize it, we're going to study a dinosaur and we're going to study a dragon and see if you don't see it as we go through it. And God has a specific issue that he presents for both of them for Job to consider, and I'll get to it as we go. Look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. So the behemoth, there are several commentators in the past who said it's the hippopotamus, it's an elephant. See if you think it's an elephant. I made him with you. He eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar tree. You ever see an elephant with a cedar tree for a tail? No. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. All of the muscles and the ligaments of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs are like bars of iron. And he is the first of the ways of God. So the first, that term first, it takes you to Hebrews where it talks about Jesus is better than anything. Everything in creation, all of the elements, Jesus is better than. So this behemoth, of all of the things God created, this one's actually kind of better and primary, like the Magnificat, like this great beast. And only the one who made him can bring near his sword to strike him. That's what he's saying. He's not going to be killed by anybody but the one who made him. He's a magnificent animal, and he has nothing to fear. But yet, he comes to me. Surely the mountains will yield food. All the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brooks surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he isn't even disturbed, even if the Jordan River gushes into his mouth. Well, that must be a hippopotamus. No. This is a magnificent dinosaur. What we understand as a dinosaur. I think it's probably a T-Rex, actually. Scientists imagine that T-Rex had big, sharp teeth. But this describes a T-Rex to me. He's got the huge thighs, the heavy belly ribs, but a giant head and mouth. That the river could just rush into his mouth and it doesn't bother him. And nothing can actually pierce his nose. Interesting study on that. I used to think about dinosaurs in this chapter. Dinosaurs and that passage distracted me from the passage prior. The section of 6 verses between 8 and 14 is what God is saying to Job. You can't do it, Job. You're not able. I'm the one who's able. I have this incredible beast, and I can approach him, but no one else can. I'm approaching you, Job. You want me to approach you. You're not like this beast. You're greater than him in my eyes. I care for you more than him. Look at Leviathan, chapter 41. We'll go to Leviathan also. See if you don't think this is a great sea dragon. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? Can you put a reed through his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? He does to me, is the implication. Will he speak softly to you? He does to me, right? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as your servant? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you leash him for your maidens? So the Leviathan, God is speaking to Job as if he's aware of this creature. We're reading it thinking, what's he describing? We're not aware of it. But Job was aware of it. So interesting, it isn't outside of Job's realm of thinking to remember and understand as God describes this beast. Let's see, verse 7. Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. Remember the battle? Never do it again. It was terrifying, wasn't it, Job? So if you look over in verse 33 of chapter 41, verse 33, God says, I'm kind of getting to the end before I go through it. On the earth there is nothing like this Leviathan that's made without any fear at all. This guy has nothing, absolutely nothing to fear in the world except me, is what God says. Now, Job, what are you doing? You're contending with me. Not even Leviathan contends with me. I have a covenant. He speaks softly to me. What are you doing? You see it? I see it. I think it's amazing. It's like God takes this apex predator kind of a creature and he calls him out. He calls Job out through it. So let's see, never do it again. Verse 9. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him in battle is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed just at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? The lesser to the greater. The argument from the lesser to the greater. Here's one you remember battling at sea and being overwhelmed and terrified. Who is able to stand against him, but yet you contend with me? And I made him. It's a brilliant argument for Job to be able to kind of pull back his feathers a little bit and say, "Oh, snap. I think I'll yield, and I think I'll be silent." So let's go through this real fast. No one is so fierce. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine. This is a good reminder. God owes us nothing. He doesn't owe us an explanation. Now, He might give us an explanation, but He doesn't owe us anything. It's all His. I will not conceal His limbs, getting back to Leviathan, His mighty power or His graceful proportions. Who can remove His outer coat? Who can approach Him with a double bridle? A double bridle. Does it mean like He's a two-headed sea monster? A double bridle, maybe? Who can open the doors of His face with His terrible teeth all around? His rows of scales are His pride. They're shutly tight as with a seal. One scale is so near another that no air can come between them. They're actually joined to one another and they stick together and can't be parted. His sneezings flash forth light. His eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of His mouth go burning light. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of His nostrils as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of His mouth. Interesting. Did you know the Bible talked about dragons? Isn't that amazing? It's here. So dragons in ancient times, we have King Arthur's court, and they're out to slay the dragon. As you go back a little further, it may not be as much of a myth or a fable as you think. There might have actually been dragons in the North Sea. And Eli was talking about some of the fears of the guys as they were sailing to the New World with Columbus. Part of their fear was sea monsters. They were concerned about being overwhelmed by sea monsters. And because they knew the Bible, right? They've read it. So it's kind of interesting. Let's see, where do we want to go? Verse 23, the folds of his flesh are joined together. They're firm on him and cannot be moved. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid because of the crashings. They're actually beside themselves. They've lost their minds because of the fear that it creates. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does a spear, a dart, a javelin. Iron is like straw, bronze is like rotten wood. The arrow can't make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. Darts are regarded as straw. Look at this, verse 30. The undersides, his belly, as he's going along, they're like sharp potsherds, like sharp points. And he spreads pointed marks in the mire, like in the mud. Like if he's laying in the mud and then he lifts up, you have all these points. So he's got these little spikes all along his belly. It's an interesting description. He makes the deep boil like a pot. So the deep sea, he can spin and circle and swirl so that it just churns and churns and just is all disrupted. One would think, verse 32, one would think the deep had white hair. There's so much air and white and silver flowing because of the disruption. On earth there's nothing like him which is made without fear. He is the king over all the children of pride. So this guy has nothing to fear, this Leviathan. Now some Bible commentators say, oh, well, this is certainly a description of Satan, the dragon. Revelation 12, he's the great dragon, but this is a creature. This is a great sea creature God's appealing to for Job. He's not talking about a spiritual entity. He's talking about a physical, created animal. And Job's familiar with it. And God doesn't even ask Job a question. He just stops. He's like, that's my statement, Job. Do you see the difference between you and them? And yet I do care about you deeply. So Job responds and he says in verse 2 of chapter 42, I know that you can do everything, that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I admit it, I've uttered things that I didn't understand. I've spoken too much. Things too wonderful for me, which I do not know. Listen and please let me speak. You said, I will question you, you will answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear. Well, something's different now. My eye sees you. Therefore I abhor myself and I repent in dust and ashes. He thought he was low before. He thought he was low in the pain and the loss. But man, he's brought even lower in humility and brokenness before God, which is better than the pain and the loss and the brokenness. He thought he was in a pit. He thought he was in a pit of suffering, and he didn't think he could go any lower. And that's what he said. He's like, man, it's as bad as it can get, so I'm going to say it. I'm going to shout it. I'm not going to stop from speaking. But he didn't realize, man, there's a whole nother low that's way more important, and that's being low in humility before God. He's broken circumstantially, but now he's broken spiritually. And God's got him actually in the best place for him, right where he needs to be. And this is the end of the speeches. And the compassion and mercy of God is revealed. Bringing Job to the end of himself. Job no longer needs to know the answers. He's aware of his standing before God and that God does care, but God can overwhelm him. And yet, I shouldn't have ever said anything. And that's good. It's a good place to be. Now it was after the Lord had spoken these words to Job that the Lord said to Eliphaz, one of his counselors, my wrath is aroused against you and against your two friends, for you've not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. So now we have a flip. If we go back to their speeches, Job was pretty consistent as far as God is thinking. But these guys are totally off base. Now their mindset was they're going to counsel Job. So they're speaking wrongly regarding God. in terms of how are you going to counsel somebody, they were speaking wrongly. They were misrepresenting God. Now therefore, take for yourselves 7 bulls, 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you. Ironic, isn't it? He's asking them, can you even pray for me? Can you be kind? Can you have pity on me? But now Job's got the tables turned where he's being asked by God to now intercede for them. And he doesn't hold it against them, right? He's able to. My servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept him, lest I deal with you according to your folly. Because you've not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Second time, it's repeated, so it's emphasized. So Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite went and did as the Lord commanded them, for the Lord had accepted and forgiven Job. If you look in the margin there, it's an interesting phrase. The Lord had lifted up the face of Job. That word accepted. The Lord had lifted up the face of Job. You imagine God just like gently when you're a little kid and you're just crying and you're blubbering and you're broken and you just like lift their chin up. Look at me. Look at me. It's okay. Have you ever done that as a parent? It's going to be okay. You hold him and you hold him close. You lifted up his face. He comforted him. God brought comfort to Job even in the midst of all of this. Job was humble because this is God's character. He drew Job near. He still did it. And verse 10, the Lord restored. Restored means He brought it all back. He brought back all the possessions of Job, all of his losses when he prayed for his friends. So that's interesting. Job needed to be obedient too, to pray. And then God restored him. Right? Kind of a test. God walks us through a little bit of a test. But God didn't just give him what he had lost. He gave him twice as much as before. So God fully restored and abundantly restored. Then all of his brothers, all of his sisters, where were they before, right? He says, my whole family, everybody's abandoned me. But now they come back. Remember, this is months. They've abandoned him and now they come back. And they're there now. They're arriving and they've all come and they ate food with him in his house and they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversity that the Lord had brought upon him. Each one gave him a piece of silver, each a ring of gold. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, 7,000 in chapter 1, 6,000 camels, 3,000 camels in chapter 1, 1,000 yoke of oxen, he had 500 in chapter 1, and 1,000 donkeys, 500 in chapter 1. So he did double it all. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. So this is how many children he had at the beginning. God gave him 10 additional children. 10 new children. He called the name of the first daughter Jemima, which means pancake mix, right? No. Jemima actually means handsome or beautiful as the day. The second was Keziah. Cassia is a fragrance. The third one is Karen Hapuch, which means a horn of many colors, like a beautiful horn of colors. And there were none found in the land so beautiful as the daughters of Job. Their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers, which wasn't common, because the brothers were the only ones who stood for the inheritance. And after this, Job lived 140 years, and he saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations. So Job died old and full of days. Now it's interesting as we arrive at the end of Job, the great mystery of why did God even bring Job up to Satan in the first place? The lesson of Job is we can't get caught in the why. We can't get caught in the why. That's a trap for us. And that's where Satan wants us to get caught in, is the why. And as soon as you start asking why, the doors of heaven begin to shut. Because God isn't going to be provoked into answering why. He wants you to trust Him. And if my trust is based on that answer of why, then my trust is frail. And I need something more stable. I'm on shaky sand. So let's go to Romans 8 real quick, and we'll do a few New Testament applications. Romans 8, we all know everything works together for good, but I want to give you a different verse. Go to 8:18. Paul says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy. They're not worthy to be compared with the glory which will be revealed in us." And it's not just us, it's all creation, which is what we read in Job right now. "For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God." All of creation is eagerly waiting, a personification of creation itself, eagerly waiting for God to restore and reveal His glory in us as we're co-heirs with Christ. In the eternal perspective, in these 80 years, half of your life until you went through this hard thing, a window of time of months for Job, a window of time for us perhaps that may even become 40 years. But in light of eternity, it's a momentary light affliction. Not to be compared with what's coming. And not to be eclipsed by a why. Why? That sandbags our faith. It sandbags our growth. So go to the next one, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, a couple pages over. Paul's giving his biographical defense and some of the hardships he's gone through. 2 Corinthians 4. And if you go down to verse 16, he says, "Therefore, even in light of all these things, he's been shipwrecked, he's been stoned, he's gone through, despair and persecution. He's like, therefore we don't lose heart though. We don't lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing. We're struggling. We're going through hard things. But inwardly, I'm being renewed day by day." He's drawing strength from the Lord. And he's like, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." There's beauty coming out of this that we don't even yet see. That eternal weight of glory won't be revealed until we're in heaven, until we're transformed from this natural body to an immortal body. That's coming. And Paul says, don't lose heart. Don't lose heart right now. So last one, go to 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 1. In this, verse 6, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be," may not always need be, but if need be, now for a little while, "you've been grieved by various trials." Difficult things happen. Things happen to us. But there's an underlying thing that God's accomplishing, and that is, verse 7, "that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though your faith is tested by fire, it may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ." So this is what Job said way back. He's like, I'm going to be tested, but I'm going to come out as gold. I'm not going to yield. I'm not going to let go of it all. Peter picks up on the same theme. If need be, difficulties come. Understand, there's a beauty that comes out of it. Your faith is being shown to be genuine to those around you, and even testifying to you internally. Oh, wow, okay. I doubt. Have you ever doubted? Have you ever doubted, am I really saved? I've doubted that. I think we all probably have at some point, but it's like, but the testing of your faith reveals that it's genuine both to you and to those around you. It's like, oh, the Lord is with me. He's comforted me in it. He's brought me through it. He's walked me through the fire. And I think that's where we want to leave Job. I'm more than blessed going through Job. I didn't know if I could do it in 4 weeks, but God has sustained me, and I hope you guys have been blessed and come out of it with a deeper understanding of Job. And you've only got two options. You're either the Messiah, or you've got to put your faith in the Messiah. There's no other way to get out of this world alive, right? So let's put our faith in Him. Let's walk with Him closer day by day. Peter said that exceedingly precious promise, exceedingly precious faith that we all share. So let's rejoice in that today. Lord, thank you. Thank you for revealing to us the compassion and mercy of God in Job's life. Your character, Lord, beyond our understanding, your care for nature, the animals of the field and the mountain, and yet how much more, Lord, you care for us. Lord, help us not to forget that. Help us not to grow dim in those truths and just draw near with a full and expectant heart towards you. Lord, will you lift our faces this week? Will you shine upon us? Go before us and have your way, Lord. Pour out blessing in the lives that surround us. Use us for your kingdom, for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.